I find one of the biggest things is entrepreneurs say, I need to go to another country to do this because they've just seen bad stuff in the news in Canada. Statements that aren't positive from politicians or from regulators. I try to tell them like, that doesn't have any legal weight.
My guest today is a crypto lawyer and programmer who has been instrumental in the development of the crypto industry in Canada. He has worked with large Canadian crypto exchanges, public companies, government, and across the decentralized finance landscape. Please welcome Addison Cameron-Huff.
Good afternoon, Jeremy.
How are you today?
Great. How are you?
I'm great.
It's been a
It's lovely to
little
see
while
you.
since our last chat. Yeah.
This is sort of season 2 of a podcast series that I started last year. This one is about replatforming finance, and you are our first guest, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I want to just give people a sense of your background because it's quite interesting. I mean, you've been in this space a very long time. How did you arrive at the doorstep of crypto?
Great question. Like lots of people, I originally wrote this off as some sort of scam of people making their own money. Surely that's a scam. That was during law school, and some of my friends were programmers. I came from Waterloo undergrad. Was really into the tech side of things, but crypto stuff, I'd sort of overlooked it. I saw maybe a Wired magazine about Silk Road, and like, oh well, if it's not a scam, it's some sort of drug dealing thing or something like that. It's easy to write things off. Other people I know, a lot of people ask the same question. You hear them give a speech of like, oh, I immediately got it. I was right on in there. No, I didn't. I got a call from Anthony Diorio, who was one of the co-founders of Ethereum, which today means something to people, but certainly didn't back at the start of 2014. And I had just finished up my articling at McCarthy Tetro, big law firm in Canada. Went up to start my own law practice. I thought, oh, I'll be a tech lawyer. I'll just switch sides of the table because I was a programmer before. Okay, I'll be the programmer lawyer. I'll do that. Turns out programmer lawyers are most needed in crypto, where nobody knew how any of the stuff was working. And it ended up being a great fit. So for me, the real answer there is Anthony Diorio. And that's a pretty lucky first call, really.
Yeah, but to your point, it's like, what do you tell your parents you're working on? I mean, I think some of us even still struggle with that.
Actually, it's more my grandmother. A little while ago, she said, my God, yeah, this Bitcoin and crypto stuff, years ago, I remember you telling me about it before it was in the news. And like, I heard it here first.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, like in my circumstance, my mom, I can tell you, is like just very knowledgeable because she's gone and taken the time to try to understand, why I do this every day, why I care so deeply about it, and to kind of fight through the noise, as you said, because it's so easy to dismiss. It's so easy to dismiss the space,
Well,
partly
not
because
anymore. Now I don't think anyone can do that anymore. Now it's something, but
without question. I mean, it's not going away, right? And that's, as I was thinking about the folks that I wanted to speak to and the themes we wanted to cover, as we do this series, for me, this is about a complete replatforming of finance. And I think, we'll certainly go into that a little bit deeper. I wanted to touch on something you had said previously to me, which is like, as somebody with a background in programming and, the capabilities of sort of a business person or like an integrator because of your experience with the law, do you find that that's the role that you've been playing, less about, being somebody's lawyer, but actually just being like this very well-rounded counsel that understands very deeply the mechanics of this thing, which is undefined by and large?
that's probably how most of my clients view me. I actually do the work as well. I love drafting a great contract. But yeah, for sure. A lot of it ends up being that kind of integration work and teeing things up for other specialty counsel, for example, because lots of the people who work in this space, they are not technical experts. And normally that would come from the client, but in this world, often the clients can't explain it very well either. And they don't know what facts to pick and choose to present it to the other lawyers as well, and ends up being a confusing mess. So you need at least one person who can understand what's the business trying to do? How does it really work? And then what do the lawyers need to be able to give the advice that they need to give? Because I'm not the everything lawyer, certainly not the everything international lawyer. Many of my clients are located elsewhere, and they rely on lawyers in multiple countries. You need specialty tax counsel, securities counsel, litigators, depends what it is. But in every case, people need to integrate all of those things because if you don't, that's where things get missed. And that's where things start going really off the rails for these companies. And you've probably come across this a few times in your career.
I have. It almost sounds like you act as in-house counsel
I do.
because, yeah, you act as in-house counsel to external clients. Although your work at Decentral, you would have been the in-house counsel, I presume, or were you playing a different role? Were you engineering at the time as well?
So I started off as the chief legal officer, but then I switched to being the president and oversaw the development of the new version of the application, which wasn't intended originally at the time. But yes, I've a strong development background that I don't really talk about because that's a little bit confusing to explain. And also today, I'm not a professional programmer, but for sure.
Absolutely.
And the business side is really fascinating. And in a slightly different life, I would have continued on that track. But I find the problems of law and the challenges there actually even greater than the challenges of building products, which it's not formulaic, but there are formulas for building products properly and ways to do that. Whereas the legal side and new developments in all kinds of different areas, it's something completely new. Last week I had a client present a smart contract system. It's probably the most complicated thing I've seen in 10 years of working in this. Amazingly smart, great guys. It took hours and hours with them to really understand exactly how all of the things work so that the legal side can then be analyzed. Because that first step is really how does it work? And you'd be amazed how often that's not obvious.
It's interesting that you sort of closed with that statement because, what you were talking about was sort of indicative to me of it being a very non-linear process. And I think, if I look at the fintech world and I look at, building something like a card spending program or even a direct brokerage, legal and regulatory compliance, it sort of leads, right? And you need to find out who the right partners are, and that's sort of a function of the types of licensing that you want to go acquire or the authorizations you want to go and acquire. And so you kind of start from a place where you look at the regulatory framework and you sort of define where you're going to play in the value stream. And then you can start to think about, okay, what is that product? And maybe you have to go back a little bit and sort of reevaluate, the regulatory framework that you want to work within or the role that you want to play in the end customer journey. But by and large, those things are defined. We're talking about an industry that does not have much in the way of definition from a regulatory oversight perspective.
Well, some things do for sure, but what you're talking about is exactly why I never got into, say, the security side. I'm making ETFs, for example, all these crypto ETFs. I don't do that kind of work because they're securities lawyers. They're great at that. They already do that. Whether it's Bitcoin in the ETF or something else, it's the same thing, same regulatory system that you're following through on. Great for them, good work. Those things are important. There's billions in that. Great story. That's not really the most fun part for me, though. I do like these things of making something new, and I've been a part of a few of those different stories, and the regulations do follow afterwards too, which is kind of neat to see. Not always what you'd want to see, but interesting to see us. It really does work like that. Somebody pioneers something. Someone's got a great idea, got a good team, they've got money, opportunity, customers love it. Go out and do it, or maybe not. And the questions are, well, actually, not what's the regulatory framework and who do I partner with to do this, but is there a reason I can't do this? What's the reason not to do this? And for Canadians and even lots of Canadian lawyers, that's actually a strange question, even though it's fundamental to how the law works. The law is supposed to work like that. You can do anything you want so long as there isn't a rule against it. That's supposed to be how the law works. But for most Canadians and lots of business people, they don't even recognize that concept in 2025 Canada. It's not you can do anything unless there's a law against it. It's where's the stamp of approval? And I see those questions from compliance people and other people too. Where's the government stamp of approval? Can you get this regulatory agency to approve this? No, because they don't do that. Okay, can you ask them anyway and get them to give us a letter or some sort of stamp that says that it's okay if you do this because they don't regulate this? No, because they don't do that either. That's not their job. But it's confusing for people because There seems to be stamps for everything.
That's it. There seems to be steps for everything is sort of a very interesting thought experiment. The difference between asking for permission and asking for forgiveness, would you say, is it fair to say that
I'm
that's
not
the difference?
saying that though. That's a different
Okay.
thing. That's the American
Okay.
approach. That's
That's
where there is a law and you break it. I don't do that kind of law. Probably no one should. But not all lawyers agree with that. But but really, that's not really a good idea either, in my book. It would be more the classical view of how things work. And courts do say this too. Is there a rule against it? And the thing with lots of crypto stuff is the answer is no to many things. And that's why rules have come out later, because actually no one contemplated that situation happening. There's no rule against it because it wasn't even possible before. Like new technical means have made it so that people can do something totally new and not thought of before. And I think a lot of people think that crypto and law stuff works the way you just said of, oh yeah, break the rules and see what you can get away with and watch the rules change afterwards or something like certain famous tech companies have done in many areas. I don't think that's a great approach, and I don't think that's how most of this stuff is either.
that sort of takes me back to the earlier comment you made about what is the reason why not? And I think one of the earliest memories of building a relationship with you was you saying, if nobody else is doing it, there's probably a good reason.
Great guideline. You can usually skip lawyers on that one, where if you see something that's an obviously great opportunity and nobody's doing it and lots of people are talking about it, it's usually because it's illegal. That's that's the typical answer. It's not always the case. And that's why, like for my work, it's more things that are technically novel and enabled by new technology rather than just, oh yeah, there's great consumer demand here. Usually those things go hand in hand with what's illegal. There's high demand for it and it's banned. People love
Well,
all kinds of things that are banned.
that is a very clear and fascinating framing, right? Like on the one hand, you're saying, hey, if nobody else is doing it, you should probably go figure out why. There's probably a good reason. On the other hand, you've told me that you have a lot of clients that come through the door and you're genuinely looking at them and saying, this is novel. I've never seen this before. And in those circumstances, that may be the reason why nobody else is doing it. And so you kind of have to like separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
For sure, and that's not easy to do. And always for myself, that's the doubt, right? Like, is there some way of looking at this situation from maybe a different angle that would make it look like something that is prohibited? Because sometimes that is in the eye of the beholder. Other times they're contested questions. For example, years ago with a team, could you make a stable coin for the Canadian dollar? Addison, what are the models out there? How could this be done in the best way? Can this be done? And now there's staff notices from securities regulators with their view on it. Those staff notices are guidance, but they're not the same as regulation or a court decision. So that's sort of an opinion from securities regulators on this. It's still contested. We just saw this in the United States recently around stablecoins, where they put out a different view on it federally in the US. So we're still seeing that be a contested space as well. But for that one and other big questions like that, of something really interesting and a great product, you really do have to think about it and say, well, how could someone look at this negatively? Because there's your positive story you're putting forward. And that's one of the things I do in my work. Construct a legal narrative around the product, because those things are incredibly powerful. How you frame the product in your terms of use, in your marketing, all of these kinds of things, the view that you put forward might be adopted. It usually is by other people. People readily accept what's in front of them and what they can read, and they don't really think, oh, what would be an alternative framing of it? But as a lawyer, you always have to consider that. What would someone that doesn't like this idea, how might they construe this as something else? Because obviously you don't just think of your good arguments, you think the bad arguments as well.
And I imagine that that is very challenging for most people that are, dialed in on the product side, or maybe they created this innovation and they've started a company around it. And the only way forward for that person and that business is the righteous path that they are on. everything outside of that is ultimately going to fall by the wayside. But everything outside of that is those are very powerful stakeholders in, the greater ecosystem. If we're just talking about finance, if we think that, blockchains and crypto, and you said the word stable coins, which obviously we'll probably spend the next 20 minutes talking about, if these things are truly novel innovations that create good customer outcomes, then the stakeholder group outside of the person building towards that future is very powerful. They are going to have a very important perspective, but in many ways a correct perspective on what the risks are.
I think there's a lot of different ways to view that in different businesses and how that plays out. But these are the hard questions of entrepreneurs too, right? Like, yes, people don't really want to hear bad answers, but in Canada, people kind of expect bad answers. Most of my
That's fair.
clients on the Canadian side, they don't expect the government to be pro innovation. They don't expect things to be easy like that. And they want to know upfront, are there any existing rules that are against this? And people do accept that usually. They don't just plow forward with it. At least in my experience. Maybe it's the sort of people who contact me. Maybe the other people don't have lawyers at all. But most Canadians, they don't want to move forward if the view of lawyers is, yeah, I don't think you can do this. Even a maybe is usually not good enough. Different risk tolerance in other countries, though, for sure. Different attitudes towards law.
Well, but I think the comment you're making about the Canadian approach, both on the sort of entrepreneur side as well as the regulator side, that seems to be fairly common across the markets where I've spent any time, which is the United Kingdom, the European Union, the United States, and then of course Canada. The answers, even if we don't like them, tend to be clear, and we have seen over the course of the last, especially 2 or 3 years, a lot more regulatory clarity, which I'm assuming is going to create a bunch of opportunity over the next couple of years. Let's talk about the next couple of years. What is the most important development in your mind happening right now, or, within the last couple of years, that is going to sort of carry the dream forward for the next few years? What are you most excited about?
Maybe the stupid answer is assets controlled by private public key cryptography. That's the crypto space broadly. And I give that answer as the stupid answer because obviously you know who I am and that's what we're talking about. But it's still not well recognized. People don't really know what those things are, and it's really just beginning. We've recently seen, just in the last year or so, lots of big asset managers, think the BlackRocks of the world, talking about putting things on chain. These are big changes. I think this is still quite small. To people in crypto, it feels like they're already at the end of history and everything's been done under the sun. That's not the case. If you look at your office there, how much of that stuff is really involving cryptocurrency and wallets and user-controlled assets right now? It's very small. I don't think it'll stay small. I think these things will continue to grow. So there's my big picture answer, but on practical
No,
things within crypto.
we can stay there for a moment, because I actually, it's such a foundational point, and I think that what I would like to see is just more engagement in sort of this foundational conversation of like why crypto matters to people. Why do we get so excited about it? That necessarily is about what you just described, which is private public key cryptography, my ability to hold title to my assets. What does that enable at like a social level in your mind? So forgetting about the technical pieces of it, like why do you feel like that is so important, and why do you feel like that's going to continue to grow conceptually and obviously like pragmatically in terms of like how these products are built?
We could make that the subject of the next 2 hours and go in any direction you want with that, and the directions are fascinating. Like the disappearance of cash. That in Canada, cash used to be common. Today, it's very rare and perhaps even suspicious. In some countries, it's banned to do transactions over certain amounts of cash. In Canada and the United States, it's not banned, but it's certainly tightening up. They can seize your cash at the border, all kinds of stuff like that, right? Big change from you've got the money. And before that, I don't know, gold coins or whatever it is, people like my great whatever grandfather was like a blacksmith in pioneer times in British Columbia. He's not taking debit and credit cards. Like for most of the history of Canada and people, it was here's your thing, I'll take my thing. Goodbye, blacksmith. Today, that's not the case, though. Right? Like today, it's intermediated dramatically through international companies and all kinds of things going on. amazing opportunities. It's fascinating. A friend of mine moved back from China after a decade there, and he continued using his Chinese bank account in Toronto. He'd stop at the ATM and put in his card, and the screen comes up in Chinese. Or I'm like, what are you doing? Like, yeah, I haven't gotten around to setting up a bank account yet. Here, amazing, right? Like portable bank accounts
Yeah.
across like seriously different international systems. Spectacular. You can go on vacation, use credit cards everywhere. I'm not saying that's not great, but it's a big change, and there's a lot to be said for a different form of things that's person to person. And I don't think people's instinct for that goes away. And there's a lot you can do on the person to person side that the intermediated side is very problematic for a number of reasons, for complicated reasons, but things like anti-money laundering laws, taxes, sanctions, tariffs, who knows what going on at the international level. And for most people, they just want to kind of do their thing and maybe not be a part of that. And crypto is that. It's a system that's just not a part of that. It's just off to the side. It's you paying for your coffee with cash. That's it. It's not it's not an ongoing thing.
Well, it's interesting because if cash were to disappear today,
It
a
largely has.
government, pardon me,
It largely has.
it largely has. But if there was an intention to bring the money supply of cash to zero today, and crypto self-custody of crypto assets becomes the only way in which you can hold title to your own assets, aside from some other sort of friction-filled ways that you might hold title to, public equities with a custodian or something like that directly. But like from the perspective of like day-to-day cash and payments, it would be the only way, wouldn't it? Can't think of another way.
If you were trying to design a system today, you probably wouldn't design it with paper money or its plastic version, right? Like using the modern technology version sounds like really your only choice. And it's the only cross-border international choice, which is very interesting too. Because welcome to the global world. It's no longer the blacksmith putting shoes on that horse. Blacksmiths don't really exist anymore, and Canadians are largely participating in international economy as well. Customers all over the place. How will those transactions be done? This leads into the stablecoin discussion where you get a interesting merger of those two ideas, where it's not the native units of these cryptocurrencies, and it's certainly intermediated on one level with banks holding large amounts of cash for these stablecoin creators, but then abstracted above that to make it just like those cryptocurrency transactions. So I don't really think it's an either or as well. You can have hybrid systems that combine these kinds of things. There's really interesting qualities to letting people control things that weren't really possible before, and still all kinds of clunky UI issues, just differences in thinking for the same reasons that I told you at the beginning of this that I wrote off crypto as being a scam when I first heard about it. It's not easy to conceive of an idea in which you can control things of value with a password and solely a password. That's just really different. So I think we're still in the early days of people understanding this and trying to consider what are some new things you can do with it. And we've seen the rise of different kinds of collateralized lending on chain. We've seen stable coins that are connected to that as well. There's all kinds of things that people are building on top of this. And for most of my clients, they've switched to doing payments in USD, no longer paying in Bitcoin and Ether for paying their international contractors, things like that. Like stablecoins have really taken over within crypto companies as well.
Yeah, without question. I mean, I think because of my role with Avara, which are the creators of the Aave protocol and a few other businesses that we're in, I often have to explain just that to people, right? Like the concept of all money in the same denomination being valued equally is false, because if you're a crypto native company and you hold assets in this format, it might be easier for you to access financial services on chain using the technologies, the infrastructure, and the format that you already have, as opposed to taking taking those assets and moving them into a completely different system. And I suppose the reverse is true, right? Like most people walking around on the street would say, well, why do I need crypto? I don't have a reason to go and lift and shift everything over into this new ecosystem. But to your point, is as crypto becomes more important to the global financial infrastructure, that hybrid system will be abstracted away and people won't necessarily need to think about those differences.
It has to be a lot better if you want people to do it, and it can be, because when you're stuck with silos and stacks of regulations and weird cross-border patches to make that work, tons of things are out of the question or incredibly difficult to do. But right now, you could build a crypto wallet to have people swap in and out of different currencies, gold, and all kinds of stuff, and have it automatically managed. You can have it be linked to events where it'll automatically do stuff, and you can do this kind of robo-advisor stuff that companies have promised for a while but don't deliver because of laws about advisors and who can tell you what to do and liability and these sorts of things. We're sort of into the just do it part of that. These wallets don't really exist yet, but there's no technical reason why they can't. I see that as being the future for sure, where you can move between these things. Do you want to hold your money in Canadian dollars or US dollars, or do you want it to be able to move over to euros, yuan, gold, Kenyan real estate, S&P 500, whatever it is, and use those as money? And then you've got a new approach to money as well. And maybe that's something that people would find appealing because a lot of people hold money right now and that money just loses value due to inflation. So just day one, you could just beat that with better systems like this. And because it's seamless and globally competitive, and yes, it's just starting. So these things aren't really there yet, but you can see it. You can see it coming. Once you drop those transaction fees down to zero, once you make it international, once you open it up to thousands and thousands of companies to build new things, once you start setting up trusts to hold these assets in interesting and secure places to create these tokens, as long as they can be properly moved in and out, you can have liquid markets for these things, suddenly you can have your money be doing a lot more. And not just a lot more to somebody else's advantage, but actually to your advantage. That people can gain the advantage of those things by competition. Right now, Canadian banks don't compete for deposits with Italian banks. For a select number of customers, maybe they do, but on the whole, they don't. These things are really difficult right now. And for most people, that might not sound relevant, but why not move your money to the place in the world that's stable and secure that pays the best interest rate on it, the people who need that money the most, and then you see an improvement in the global capitalist system. It's actually for the advantage of the people at the bottom who, you know, yes, people are winners. You can read all the stuff about economic theory, and yeah, everyone's a winner in these systems, and everyone's much richer over time, blah, blah, blah. But on the whole, it's often the companies running these financial services and exchanges and other kinds of things that are generally benefiting the most from these kinds of things and from the lack of competition. There's competition in so many different things, but not in many kinds of money-related services. So I see that as being one of the upcoming changes.
It is fascinating to me that we're at a place now, we'll say 10 years in, where all of this is possible and we haven't figured out how to market it yet. Right? Like, as you said, there are many places in the world where people don't have sufficient access to US dollars. And they want more access to US dollars. And if they're going to hold a US dollar, they want to be treated the same as somebody holding a US dollar in the United States. And, we tend to think about these things as problems that need to be solved for someone somewhere else, maybe in the global south. But the reality is there's a TD Bank behind me. And if I went in there with 10,000 US dollars right now, they would probably pay me at least 1% less in interest on that US dollar than if I got on a plane and went to the TD branch in New York State.
For these things, but for you as a customer, would you really feel your money is less secure in the US version of TD Bank than in the Canadian version?
Nope.
It's not going to matter to you. As a customer, it's just how much more can you get?
So that I wanted to come back to the idea of globalization and access in the finance realm in particular. And then also just the fact that Canada has been a proponent of deeper global integration for our economies and social policy and so on. Shouldn't we be, as a country, more excited about the opportunity to integrate finance and bring sort of people together around the idea that the finance system is now globalized and more accessible? Is this not an opportunity for us as Canadians?
Well, I think so. I actually think not many people really believe that. Like, most people are against competition. They're against opening things up. There's tariffs on all kinds of stuff in Canada. For example, against electric cars by BYD. BYD makes the best electric cars in the world. I've been hearing for years about how we're going to green the economy. The government buys electric cars, and then what do? They ban buying electric cars from the best and cheapest electric car manufacturer, and also triggers huge tariffs from China on agricultural products exported from Canada. The actual things being done in Canada don't align with what you're saying at all. Actually, the government has tariffs and rules restricting all kinds of things at the federal and provincial levels. No one wants to get rid of them because they're incredibly popular politically. And this is the reality of like complicated stakeholder debates, discussions, power struggles. I would love a world though where that isn't the case and people can buy cheap electric cars from the best manufacturers of electric cars in the world. And I don't think Canadians would fall behind in this environment. Canadians are really good at this stuff. I work with tons of Canadians and live in Canada. And I haven't left for other countries like many people. And people suffer under these rules and all of these problems. But if they could do it, they would for sure.
We do not have a Canadian dollar denominated stablecoin that has reached the amount of utility or scale, of course, that the US dollar denominated stablecoins have. And I would never expect it to, but certainly what you're describing, I think, has had a dampening effect on our ability to build such a tool, such a utility. Do you feel that there is going to be some movement here over the next couple of years? I mean, of course, stablecoins are the conversation at the intersection of crypto and traditional finance or fintech. Is this something that we're going to see develop further in Canada in the CAD denominated sense, or have we already lost that battle and we're all going to be transacting in US dollar denominated stablecoins 50 years from now?
Well, I'm well known for my association with QCAD and work for them. Great product. QCAD does exist. They're still at it. I haven't worked for them in many years. The VRCA staff notices, though, definitely are damper on the stablecoin side of things. And there is a view in Canada on restricting and controlling things. And that is the opposite of what you should do when the entire world doesn't use Canadian dollars. Don't worry about controlling this system because nobody's using them. Go to other countries, they don't use Canadian dollars. They use US dollars. Like in an ideal world, the Canadian government would be trying to promote Canadian dollars for use outside of Canada. I didn't get a laugh out of you, but it would get a laugh probably out of most of the people in the government who would find that idea very strange. Like, what do you mean promoting dollars? Trade missions to African countries to get them to adopt the Canadian dollar. It would be so ridiculous. No one would put it forward, and they just think you're getting luxury vacations and going on safaris, for a government expense. But it's possible, and why not? And it should be something that exists. And what I was telling you earlier about wallets that automatically adjust and do these kinds of things, automatically hedging your risk on certain transactions you have coming up, easily having enough dollars in your currency to pay the expenses you need in the place you're based in, while balancing these other factors, that's definitely the future. And you need to have a Canadian dollar stablecoin. The government should be promoting QCAD. They should be out there trumpeting this with a huge campaign of saying, look what we can do. We're actually part of the future. Let's get Canadian dollars out there. I mean, there was no publicity campaign. Instead, it's staff notices that I don't regard as being positive for these developments. And that's a shame because that was a great opportunity to do that. And instead, it probably will be ceded to the US dollar. That's how it's looking. And that kind of makes sense because that's the biggest currency in the world and that's the most popular one. Tons of Canadian businesses already do things in US dollars. I'm not saying this is too strange, but it is too bad.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, if we are resigned to the fact that some of us are going to use stablecoins, businesses are going to use stablecoins, and they're going to use US dollar denominated stablecoins because that's what the payment flows necessitate. I'm transacting all over the world and those payment flows are typically in US dollars. But then to not be able to manage my Canadian dollars in a similar format, in a similar piece of infrastructure, in a similar way, and have
Forex.
a
That's what you
huge
could have had.
separation. Exactly. And have a huge separation between these two things is a shame. It's interesting. Like, I don't know how serious the conversation was, but I think it was serious enough to be brought forward, which was that, like, you remember in the 2008 financial crisis, there was some conversation about Iceland having a desire to potentially adopt the Canadian dollar, right? So it's not a super foreign concept that the Canadian dollar could be a safe haven for people, and the institutions of this country that collectively back the idea of the Canadian dollar.
Or even better, do what other people buy Canadian dollars for outside of Canada, which is make it a bet on the petroleum industry. Oil and gas is a huge part of that story internationally. Have Canada make a petrodollar. Why not? Oil-backed dollars. Now you have the oil stablecoin created by the Alberta government. You can trade that in your wallet as well, nearly free. Instead of having those Canadian dollars, the US dollars, you've got oil dollars instead, fixed to the price of oil. If that's your thesis and you believe in an oil-based economy and fossil fuels and all of this kind of stuff, have oil dollars in your wallet. Other people, gold dollars in their wallet. And those are the choices you can have. And algorithms controlling this within your wallet, these things are amazing. And that innovation is not happening.
Interesting. You just framed stable coins through the lens of a different asset class, which I find fascinating because I never thought about like Paxos Gold as a stable coin, but it effectively is a stable coin. It's just maintaining stability with a different asset. I mean, you brought
A
up
slightly
Alberta.
different regime in Canada, you'd have several of these. Canada's got gold, Canada's got oil. You can make a few of these commodity stablecoins. They would have been great. They would have had good demand too.
And the portability of the format aligns so perfectly to the global nature of those industries, right? And the financialization of those industries, right? Yeah,
And then you
that's a
have
great.
hedging, and then you have all of these other things. But instead of being done through intermediaries and the very high cost of doing that, it's really expensive to do all of these kinds of tasks. It's just made up for in enormous volume, but with software doing it instead of the people, much cheaper. That's how you have a small number of people in Canada do amazing things on the global stage too. The people are here to do all of these things. Already there's people offering these derivatives. They have the knowledge about how to do this. It's all available.
So how do we unlock that further?
Get rid of VRCA staff notices. Have people start promoting this. I find one of the biggest things is entrepreneurs say, I need to go to another country to do this because they've just seen bad stuff in the news in Canada. Statements that aren't positive from politicians or from regulators. I try to tell them like, that doesn't have any legal weight. Like, well, I'm just worried because what's going to happen next? And that's what some of my work is as well. It's not just what are the rules now. Where do you see those going, and what would be your solutions for how to deal with that if these things happen as well? So some of this is about future-proofing your systems, and that is one reason why sometimes people go to other jurisdictions as well. Just concerns around what will happen next.
I think what I'm hearing from you though is that those concerns are largely unfounded. Is that
Oh
is
yeah,
that a fair
and
characterization?
now
Because
I
I
mean there are
agree.
well-founded concerns too, but a lot of it, yeah, it's just a lack of positivity around these
That's right.
innovations because of fear and probably also concerns about impacting existing things. Most people don't want things to change in Canada. That's the sad truth.
But even on the part of the crypto industry or entrepreneurs individually, like the pessimism, I think is unwarranted. I think that the door is
It's
still
overly
wide
pessimistic.
open. Pardon me?
Overly pessimistic.
It's
But
overly
but there are really
pessimistic, it's overly reactive.
serious concerns about stuff with Canada too. Vague laws around securities, that's certainly an issue. Effectively martial law declared, seizing people's assets a few years ago of protesters. These are genuine concerns that people have about what might happen suddenly next. In Canada, this kind of stuff is not it's not good. People need a stable environment in which they understand what the rules are or the lack of rules, because a lot of things are kind of in between that. There isn't a rule for it, there isn't a thing that says you can do it, And then you're somewhere in between, and people are kind of worried about where things will land on that. That's not good either. I think you would need a big change in tone for one, but also you would need significant legal reforms to make the things I'm talking about, like if Alberta wants an oil dollar. Actually, maybe the government could do that on their own. I don't know.
I mean,
But
Alberta's giving me energy here because of the uniqueness of ATB, which has demonstrated a willingness to engage crypto companies and learn about the industry, and has made significant investments in just like being close, being nearby the industry, and supporting entrepreneurs to the degree that they can, right? Like they're a business. They want to see a return on that investment over time. But no, I think they've just taken such a innovation forward, but also, cautious
it's allowed.
approach. Yeah,
What they've been doing, it's pro innovation, but it's allowed. It's
totally.
within the framework. It's all good. ATB is a lawful business run by the Alberta government, but a lot of that is just compliance officers being concerned about things, and they can't point to a specific reason why not. And I think ATB has more embraced that and said, no, actually, we're going to go with what the laws really are. Then we're going to bank the customers we want to bank.
Yeah, I mean, there's centralization risk within the set of institutions that we're maybe talking about, like 35 Schedule One banks in Canada. But then there's also just centralization risk within these companies as well. I mean, I can tell you certainly from my experience, like I have been very fearful at certain points in my life around like mortgage renewal time. That my association with the crypto industry, it would just take one person inside of one of these big banks. And I have banked with the Royal Bank of Canada for my entire life. If somebody at that bank decided one day, we don't want to have him as a customer, too risky, without looking into it, there's no recourse for me. What am I going to do? I'm going to show up at Scotiabank and they're going to say, you were with Royal for 30 years. Why won't they serve you anymore? Like, I would immediately not be able to access the system. I mean, that scares the hell out of me.
And that's kind of pseudo law. There's a lot of that in Canada.
Pseudo law.
Like
Amazing.
the law is like a combination of real law and imagination, risk policies, directions they want to go in, fraud concerns, which in fairness is actually driving quite a bit of that as well. There has been a huge amount of cryptocurrency related fraud, and that's one of the reasons banks don't like this stuff. It's not a
Absolutely.
just anti-competitive conspiracy like some people think. There, there's legitimate issues there too, but that's something I've faced a lot, and something that comes up as well is that people are unable to distinguish between the frauds and the lawful companies, and they just say, "Well, we're not going to bother." Well, I mean, that's problematic too, but that in turn is because Canada doesn't do much about frauds. It's almost impossible to get police action on frauds. If there was a cleanup in Canada of the financial industry and frauds, and criminals actually went to jail, a lot of those problems would go away as well. So you're seeing kind of second order effects about failing to apply enough law in some areas, like frauds, and then you end up with maybe too much somewhere else that's not the right place. And then that has impacts on the lawful business people. I add that in part because sometimes I get people at the end of these things, we've got maybe 5 minutes left here. They're like, oh, so you're against law? No, no, I'm a lawyer. I'm strongly in favor of law. I've blogged about it for years. I think it's really important. But there's a difference between bad regulations of things that shouldn't have rules and law. Like there's common law, there's criminal law, there's all kinds of great things. And almost everything in Canada is not within some special regulatory regime.
Yes.
Almost all business does not have a special law. It's just that people have heard so much about these special regulatory systems, and they're so big in the Canadian economy, and something like 1/3 or more of all jobs are licensed. So people have kind of adopted this mentality that doesn't even really reflect how things work. For example, I will let you ask that question you're about to ask there,
No,
but
no, no.
I
This
was
is
in a
no,
great
no,
meeting a
please.
little
This
while
is
ago, bunch of top people related to crypto. I'm not allowed to say more about the meeting, it's one of their rules. But one of the people was saying like, oh yeah, but so much fear about these issues, and what if there aren't rules around these things? Like, what will happen? I was like, well, like coffee shops don't have special regulations, and you go there and you're not poisoned day in and day out. You go and buy your coffee. Why are you not poisoned by those people? But nobody thinks like this, right? Because these are actually like centuries old debates around this. But actually, most things don't have legal regimes that apply to them. and instead they're handled with general rules. It's illegal to poison people. Also, it would be bad for their business. If you get caught poisoning your customers with poisoned coffee, like off to jail, hopefully. And you don't need to come up with a special regulatory system for coffee shops. You just need to strongly enforce the poisoners go to jail rule. And if you do enough of that, you don't have a problem. On the other side, so it can be tough for people, though, to try to disaggregate things. And maybe in fairness to some people's solutions, they say, well, we can't solve those problems, but we can solve these problems. So we'll make these rules about this thing that we can do. Yeah, but is that really doing a general service? You say, well, that's not my job. My job's to do this thing. And so we'll add more rules. And so it has gone for the last century or so in Canada, with ever more rules on many things, where common law system could probably have taken care of that instead. Common law
Yeah,
rules are great.
we didn't need new laws to confirm that FTX was a fraud. There was fraud before crypto, and there was fraud before FTX, and now there's just new surface area
But
that
also,
can be
where's the prosecution in Canada?
Oh, that's a great
Sure, they went to
question.
jail in the States, but why aren't more people in jail? There were a ton of people involved in that. Like, it was a criminal enterprise. You can read all about it in US courts, but not in Canada. But it
I've
affected
never
Canadians.
considered that question. How could you tell me we have 5 minutes left and then open up that question?
It's your
Listen,
podcast. I don't know how long
at,
you can go.
I know. Well, I can go forever, but I know exactly what's going to happen here with this, which is like these conversations are just like an ongoing part of both of our lives, and the network of people that are engaged in this every day is still relatively small, and it's even smaller when you consider sort of the Canadian component of it, which I love to talk about because I'm not going anywhere. Like I'm going to be somewhere in this 10 kilometers for a very long time, and so we'll pick it up again sooner than later. And I really appreciate you doing this with me today. And I hope others find, a couple of bits and pieces within this conversation that allow them to just like go a little bit deeper or just reframe their expectation of how they should engage going forward, because it's not going away. It's not going away in this country. And the only way forward is to learn and sort of integrate all of the various stakeholder groups within society so that we can move forward in a positive way and avoid some of the negative events that we've seen in the past. So
Thank you very much for having me on today.